That night promised to be just another great football spectacle, but no one imagined it would become an unforgettable moment, capable of changing the way the world saw one of the greatest players in history. The stadium was packed, the fans cheered, with every touch of the ball, and Cristiano Ronaldo, as always, was the center of attention. The game was decisive, a match between two giants of European football. The score was still 0, but the tension in the air showed that something big was about to happen. From the first minutes, it was clear that one player in particular was being targeted for something that went beyond the sport's natural rivalry. A young talent, known for his dedication and skill, was constantly ignored by the referee when he suffered fouls, while any slightest action on his part resulted in exaggerated punishments. Fans noticed the strange pattern, but on the field, the player found himself alone, unable to defend himself against what appeared to be a silent pursuit. Minutes into the first half, the move that would highlight the injustice happened. The young man received the ball in midfield, dribbled past two opponents with impressive skill, and just as he was about to finish, he was brutally brought down inside the box. The sound of the clash echoed throughout the stadium. Fans stood up in outrage, and the cameras clearly captured the foul. But, to everyone's surprise, the referee remained impassive. Without review, without consulting the VAR, without any hesitation, he ordered the game to continue, as if nothing had happened. Silence took over the stadium, followed by deafening boos. The young player remained down for a few seconds, holding his knee, visibly shaken. He knew that, once again, he would not get justice. His teammates looked at him without much reaction, perhaps accustomed to this type of treatment, or simply afraid of challenging the referee's decisions. On the bench, the coach gestured furiously, but knew that arguing wouldn't change anything. Football, so often called a fair sport, at that moment seemed to operate under invisible rules for some. It was at that moment that Cristiano Ronaldo, until then only focused on the game, realized what was happening. Something changed in his expression. He, who always fought to be the best, knew the taste of injustice. And at that moment, he decided that he would not remain silent. How many times have you seen an injustice happen right before your eyes and felt like there was nothing you could do? What if, at that moment, a single person had the courage to act? What would you do in Cristiano Ronaldo's place? Would you stay silent or take action? Comment here, have you ever been through something similar in sport or in life? We want to know your opinion. The boy wronged that night had a name, but few cared to remember it. From the beginning of his career, he had to fight against something that went beyond the four lines: prejudice and distrust from those who never believed he was good enough. Son of a humble family, he grew up playing barefoot on clay courts, dreaming of the day he could show the world that his talent would speak louder than any label. But professional football can be cruel, and he soon realized that for some, effort and skill were not enough. When he finally had the chance to play for a big club, he thought things would change, but the reality was different. In training, the ball seemed to slip away from his feet, not because of a lack of technique, but because his own teammates rarely passed him. In matches, any mistake you made was amplified, while other players had the privilege of second, third, and even fourth chances. The press ignored him, or when they talked about him, it was to highlight what they called his lack of experience. The fans, influenced by this narrative, expected little from him. It was as if no matter what he did, he would never be good enough. The injustice of that night was not an isolated episode. She was part of a long history of contempt, where referees seemed to blow the whistle on him. Coaches were hesitant to give him opportunities, and opponents took advantage of his vulnerability without fear of reprisal. But despite everything, he never complained. He remained firm, head held high, believing that one day he would have his chance to prove his worth. The problem is that in football, opportunities don't always arise naturally. In that game, his patience was at its limit. The move inside the box was his chance to shine, his moment to finally show that he was capable. But as always, justice seemed not to be on his side. As he tried to get up, feeling the weight of the blow and the frustration growing inside him, something unexpected happened. Cristiano Ronaldo, the biggest name on the field, not only saw everything but decided to act, and in that instant, everything changed. Cristiano Ronaldo saw everything. The scandalous foul, the referee ignoring it, the wronged player standing up in silence, trying to contain his frustration as he always did. But this time, something was different. The stadium still echoed with the boos of the fans who, like CR7, couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The young athlete, clearly shaken, looked around in search of an explanation, but found only averted glances and expressions of indifference. His teammates, perhaps accustomed to this kind of treatment, simply raised their arms in timid protest before returning to the game. The furious coach gestured on the bench, but his voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. The referee, impassive, pointed to the ball, signaling that the match should continue as if nothing had happened. Cristiano Ronaldo, however, was not willing to accept this. He knew what it was like to fight mistrust, what it was like to be criticized and judged at every turn. But I also knew there was a limit. There were injustices that could not be ignored, moments when football stopped being just a game and became a reflection of the worst in the competition. The inequality of opportunities, the selective blindness of the refereeing, the lack of courage of those who could make a difference but chose to remain silent. CR7 walked up to the referee, eyes fixed and a serious expression. He said something that couldn't be captured on camera, but the referee's reaction was instantaneous. An uncomfortable look, an attempt to divert the topic, and an impatient gesture for Ronaldo to return to the game. But he didn't come back. The opponent started to get angry. Players from the other team approached, trying to pressure him to move forward. Some fans shouted at him to shut up, while others clapped, supporting his stance. Time seemed to have stopped for a few seconds. The ball, motionless on the field, waited for the game to resume. But before that happened, Cristiano Ronaldo did something that no one expected, something that would change not only that game, but the way that young player would be seen from then on, something that would show the whole world that he was not just a football star, but a true leader on and off the pitch. The arbitrator showed no intention of reviewing his decision. With the whistle stuck to his lips, he maintained the rigid posture of someone who wanted to end this discussion as quickly as possible. His gaze avoided Cristiano Ronaldo's, and the way he held the notes in his pocket revealed a contained nervousness. He knew the world was watching. He knew all the cameras were focused on him at that exact moment, but he chose to remain unyielding. For him, the lack simply did not exist. The game should continue, and any protest against this would be considered indiscipline. Cristiano Ronaldo, however, did not move away. He gestured, pointed at the young player still shaken by the play, and made a point of emphasizing the mistake that everyone had seen. But the referee remained cold, indifferent, without even pretending to analyze the move. No sign of review, no VAR consultation. The assistant, positioned on the side of the field, looked away from the pitch, avoiding getting involved. The fourth referee, pressured by shouts from the bench, just shook his head, as if to say there was nothing to be done. The referee's reaction wasn't just a common mistake. It was a reflection of something bigger, of a system where some decisions seemed to be made before the game even started. The wronged young athlete already knew how it would end. I had experienced this scene before, in other games, in other stadiums, against other opponents. Always the same feeling of helplessness, always the same frustration swallowed in silence, and it was at that moment that he understood that Cristiano Ronaldo's presence there was not just a detail. The number 7 was not just any player. He was the biggest name on the field, the biggest star that night, and his voice carried a weight that no one could ignore. When CR7 spoke, the cameras recorded it. When he protested, the world listened. And in that moment, Ronaldo did more than just complain. His sharp gaze met the referees as if challenging his authority. The fans realized that something bigger was about to happen. The stadium, previously filled with noise, fell into a strange silence. And it was in this vacuum of tension that Ronaldo decided to take the next step, something no one expected, something that would completely change the course of that match. Cristiano Ronaldo was still there, standing still, staring at the referee as if he expected him to go back on his decision at any moment. But the judge's stern expression did not change. The game needed to go on, and he wasn't willing to give. Ronaldo took a deep breath, looked around and expected, at the very least, to see his teammates by his side, reinforcing the protest, demanding that justice be done. But what he found was an uncomfortable, almost deafening silence. The players who shared the field with him were static, looking away as if they didn't want to get involved. Some walked slowly to their positions, as if nothing was happening, pretending that the injustice was not their problem. Others, more experienced, just gestured discreetly to Ronaldo, as if saying to let it go, to keep playing, because that was how football worked. The wronged young athlete himself, who was still feeling the impact of the violent attack, showed no reaction other than silent disappointment. He was already used to being ignored. I had already learned the hard way that in football, talent was not always enough to guarantee respect. The public in the stadium noticed the team's apathy and began to demonstrate. Whistles echoed, fans shouted for a review, but the players remained inert. Nobody wanted to get upset with the refereeing, nobody wanted to risk a card or a possible removal. Everyone was trapped by the fear of retaliation, as if a simple challenge could cost them dearly in the future. This cowardly silence was a reflection of what happened behind the scenes in football, where interests often spoke louder than the truth. But Cristiano Ronaldo was not like the others. He never accepted that kind of mentality, never bowed his head to injustice, and this would be one more time he would prove it. If no one else had the courage to act, he would do it alone. The eyes of the world were on him, and in that moment, history was being written. Without waiting any longer, without depending on anyone's reaction, Ronaldo took an action that took everyone by surprise. And it was at that moment that everything changed. Cristiano Ronaldo had seen it all in football, from his boyhood days, struggling to become a professional, to the big stages where he established himself as one of the greatest in history. He knew the toughness of the sport like few others, but there was something about that scene that moved him in a different way. He didn't just see the brutal foul suffered by the young player, he felt it. He felt the injustice, he felt the coldness of the arbitration, he felt the cowardice of those who could have done something and chose to remain silent. And he felt above all the pain of humiliation from someone who fought to be recognized and once again was ignored. In the seconds that followed the move, Ronaldo analyzed everything around him. The young player was still recovering on the ground, resting one hand on the grass while the other held his knee. His face showed not just physical pain, but something deeper, something Ronaldo knew well, the frustration of those who try their best but are never treated the same as others. The blank look, the defeated expression. CR7 had already been there before. He had already felt the weight of doubt and judgment. But the difference is that over the years, he built a name so big that no one dared to ignore him anymore. The referee, however, did not hesitate to ignore that young man. The referee didn't even bother to pretend he was considering the foul. The game needed to go on, and that was it. The protocol was clear, but what Ronaldo couldn't accept was the naturalness with which everything was happening. It was as if that unfair decision was just one of many that had already happened to that player. And maybe it was. Maybe that boy was used to this kind of situation. But Ronaldo wasn't there. It was at that moment that something changed inside him. He wasn't the type of player who accepted anything without question. And more than that, he knew the weight his name carried. If no one else was willing to challenge that injustice, he would. It didn't matter if he was going to upset the referee, the organization, or even his own teammates. At that moment, he decided he would do what no one else had the courage to do. And when CR7 makes a decision, the whole world pays attention. Cristiano Ronaldo was never an ordinary player. His mentality has always been different. His attitude on the field has always gone beyond technique or speed. But that night, when everything seemed to follow the predictable script of ignored injustice, he decided to break football's unwritten rules. The silence of the teammates, the coldness of the referee, the apathy of the game. None of that mattered anymore. He knew that if he didn't do something there, that young player would spend the rest of the game without being given the slightest chance of being treated fairly, and that was not acceptable. The stadium watched attentively, waiting for the outcome of the discussion between CR7 and the judge. But instead of continuing the verbal protest, Ronaldo did something no one expected. With a determined look, he slowly walked towards the ball, positioned a few meters away. The referee watched carefully, as did the players on the opposing team. No one understood exactly what he intended to do. And then suddenly he kicked the ball out of bounds. The gesture took everyone by surprise. The stadium was completely silent for a split second before boos and murmurs began to spread. The referee looked at Ronaldo in disbelief. Opposing players immediately raised their arms in protest, and even some of his teammates looked shocked. But CR7 didn't care. He knew exactly what he was doing. With that shot, he stopped the game. He forced the referee to face his own omission, and more than that, he sent a clear message. If football was a game where only a few received fair treatment, then he didn't want to participate in that theater. His gesture was not just a protest, it was a challenge, a warning that if justice was not served, he would use his influence to ensure that this match would not go on as if nothing had happened. The referee, clearly disconcerted, took the whistle to his mouth and started walking towards Ronaldo. But the Portuguese star remained firm, facing him without fear. He knew that a punishment could come, that a card could be raised. But he also knew that in that moment, he had done something that would resonate far beyond that match. The game had changed, and now the answer needed to come from those who had chosen to remain silent until then. The impact of Cristiano Ronaldo's gesture was immediate. The stadium, which until then had been filled with the buzz of the stands, fell into a surreal silence. It seemed like no one knew exactly how to react to what had just happened. The biggest name on the field, the star that everyone expected to see shine, had purposely stopped the game, defying the authority of the referee in a way that few had the courage to do. For a moment, the crowd didn't know whether to cheer or be indignant. But then, like a wave slowly building into a tsunami, the reactions began to spread. On one side of the stadium, deafening boos came from the opposing fans, who saw Ronaldo's attitude as a gesture of arrogance or, for the most exalted, even disrespect. For them, the ball out of bounds was nothing more than a cheap provocation. But on the other hand, something even more powerful was beginning to happen. The fans who witnessed the controversial move, who saw the foul ignored and realized the injustice that was emerging, began to react differently. Shouts of support began to mix with the protests, creating a chaotic environment. Some Ronaldo fans, scattered around the stadium, began to applaud standing up, recognizing the Portuguese star's courage. It wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was a message, a demand for respect. Social media instantly exploded. Those who watched the game on TV or followed it online wasted no time in commenting on the number 7's attitude. Memes started to emerge. Lightning headlines were already being written by journalists around the world. The match had barely stopped, and outside the stadium, the repercussions were already taking on gigantic proportions. On the field, the players remained perplexed. The wronged young athlete, still catching his breath, watched everything with a look of disbelief and admiration. Perhaps for the first time in his career, he saw someone take concrete action in his defense. But the question now was, what would happen next? How would the referee respond to this act of defiance? How would players deal with breaking football's unwritten rules? The stadium was in shock, and the whole world was waiting for the next move. The stadium was still buzzing, divided between boos and applause, as the referee finally made a decision. He quickly walked towards Cristiano Ronaldo, clearly irritated, and raised the yellow card for the number 7. But Ronaldo didn't even blink. He didn't protest, he didn't argue. He just kept his gaze fixed on the judge, conveying a clear message. He did not regret what he had done. The referee, in turn, looked uncomfortable. I knew I was facing a moment that had already gone, beyond the limits of the field. The pressure from the cameras, the fans, and the players themselves grew every second. The truth was that that card wouldn't solve anything. The game was at a standstill, and the tension was unsustainable. It was then that something unexpected happened. One of the opposing team's players, who until then seemed oblivious to the controversy, approached the referee and, in a rare gesture in professional football, admitted that the foul had actually occurred. He didn't agree with the way the game was being conducted, and perhaps inspired by Cristiano Ronaldo's attitude, decided to tell the truth. The judge hesitated. That wasn't common. Players were not used to acting against their own interests, especially in such a close match. But now, with this new piece on the board, the referee was forced to review its stance. VAR was activated. The crowd exploded. Suddenly, that moment that seemed lost gained a new lease of life. The cameras showed the play repeatedly on the stadium's big screens, and with each replay, it became even more evident that the foul inside the area had been clear. Fans who were previously against Ronaldo began to change their opinion. The press was already reporting the turnaround live. The game, once a simple sporting confrontation, had transformed into a spectacle of morality, of the fight for justice, of an athlete who refused to accept silence as an answer. And then came the final decision. The referee returned to the field and pointed to the penalty spot. The stadium exploded. The young player, previously discredited, now had a golden chance at his feet. All thanks to Cristiano Ronaldo, who proved once again why his name is synonymous with leadership and greatness inside and outside football. But the story wasn't over yet. The whole world wanted to know what would happen next. The impact of that moment went beyond the boundaries of the field before the game had even ended. With the referee's decision to finally award the penalty, the broadcast cameras were quick to capture Cristiano Ronaldo's expression. He didn't celebrate like he would for a goal, nor did he make provocative gestures. He just walked calmly backwards, allowing the wronged young player to assume the leading role that had been denied him throughout the match. But outside, the world of football was already on fire. Commentators following the game live seemed to have divided opinions. Some said that Ronaldo's action was an unprecedented act of courage, something that is rarely seen in elite athletes, where most prefer to focus solely on their own performance. Others, more critical, suggested that he might have overreacted, that his protest might have harmed his own team. But there was something that no one could deny. That game was no longer just about football. Headlines began to appear on social media. "Cristiano Ronaldo challenges refereeing on a historic stage," said one of Europe's biggest sports newspapers. "CR7 takes unexpected action and changes the course of a controversial match," read another news portal. The video of the moment he kicked the ball out went viral in a matter of minutes, accumulating millions of views and dividing opinions among fans and experts. Former players were hurriedly called to comment on the episode. Some compared him to sports legends who in the past used their influence to fight for justice on the field. Others warned that a gesture like that could set dangerous precedents, encouraging athletes to take similar actions in any controversial move. But in the midst of all the discussions, one thing became clear. No one could ignore what had happened. The young player, who previously went unnoticed by the media, was now making headlines in all the newspapers. His name, until then forgotten on the bench and in the erased lineups, was now next to Cristiano Ronaldo's. History had been rewritten, but what would happen next? How would he react to all this upheaval? The world wanted answers, and Cristiano Ronaldo still had something to say. The football world was in a frenzy. The repercussion of the episode made that young player, who had previously been practically invisible to the media, become the center of attention. From one day to the next, he went from a forgotten name in the squad to one of the most talked about figures in the sport. But until that moment, he still hadn't said anything. Everyone wanted to know what he felt, what was going through his head after that night that changed everything. And when he finally decided to speak out, his words were even more impactful than anyone expected. In an interview given the day after the match, he was unable to hide his emotion. Visibly teary-eyed, he admitted that for a long time, he felt he would never have a real chance to prove himself. He said he grew up hearing that he would never be good enough, that he would need to work 10 times harder than anyone else to get half the recognition. And in that game, when he suffered that foul and saw the referee ignore it, he felt that his story would repeat itself, that he would continue to be just another name that no one cared to remember. But then, something unexpected happened. He revealed that when he saw Cristiano Ronaldo take that attitude, something changed inside him. For the first time, he felt that someone was willing to fight for him, to see him not as a sidekick, but as someone who deserved respect. And that, according to him, was the greatest motivation he ever had on the field. With the penalty chance, he knew it wasn't just another shot. This was his opportunity to show the world that he belonged on that stage. And, with coolness and precision, he converted the charge impeccably, leading his team to victory. That young man's career was never the same again. As the episode gained gigantic proportions, clubs began to look at it with different eyes. His name began to be talked about behind the scenes, and business people became interested in his potential. But more important than that, he realized that sometimes all it takes is a single moment to change everything. And for him, this moment came at the hands, or rather, the feet, of Cristiano Ronaldo. Fate had given him a new chance. And now, the world wanted to know what Ronaldo would say about all this. Have you ever had a time when you felt like no one saw your value, until someone unexpected decided to give you a chance? How do you think you would have reacted in this young player's place? Comment here. Have you ever been in a situation where you needed just one opportunity to show what you were capable of? We want to know your story. The whole world was waiting for a statement from Cristiano Ronaldo. His attitude had dominated the headlines, generated heated debates among experts, and more than that, changed the course of the career of a player who had previously been completely ignored. But the big question everyone wanted to know was, why? What made CR7 stop that game, defy the refereeing, and even risk his own reputation to defend an athlete that, until then, almost no one knew about? The answer came days later, in a conference packed with journalists. The atmosphere was full of expectation, and when Ronaldo took the microphone, silence took over the room. Bluntly, he began by saying that it was not a thought or premeditated act. He did not enter the field that night with the intention of creating a scene or defying the rules of the game. But when he saw what was happening, he just couldn't sit still. He said that throughout his career he learned that football is not always fair, that there are players who need to fight twice as hard, sometimes triple as much, to get the same recognition that others naturally receive. And that in that match he clearly saw that it was happening before his eyes. Cristiano Ronaldo revealed that he saw himself in that young man. He remembered the times when he was discredited, the criticism he received at a very young age, how they doubted he would go far. But the difference is that he had people who believed in him at the right time, and that made all the difference. At that moment, when the foul was not called and everyone chose silence, he knew he needed to do something. It didn't matter if it cost him a card or caused controversy. What mattered was showing that player that he was not alone. Ronaldo's words were sincere and direct, and his message went beyond football. He ended the press conference by saying that sport needs to be a space where talent always prevails over influence, where justice is applied equally to everyone. And if that day he had to stop the game to remind the world of that, then it was worth it. He smiled, thanked us, and left the room. But the story he wrote in that match would never be forgotten. Cristiano Ronaldo's attitude that night was not just an isolated gesture on the field. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes a player's true greatness isn't just in the goals he scores, but in the courage to speak up when no one else has a voice. The young athlete who had previously been ignored now had a new path ahead of him, a destiny that had completely changed thanks to that unexpected moment. But this story is still far from over. The impact of that game would continue to echo for a long time. The name of the wronged player was now circulating among the big clubs, arousing the interest of coaches and business people who previously didn't even know of his existence. The media did not forget what happened, and the referee, pressured by the repercussions, began to be questioned about their stance. The episode had created a precedent. How far could this go? Would football learn anything from this lesson, or would the system go back to silencing talents who were still waiting for their chance? Cristiano Ronaldo, as always, moved on, focused on the next challenge, but he knew he had planted something bigger than a simple act of rebellion. The young player, now more confident than ever, carried with him not only the recognition of the public, but the certainty that when everything seemed against him, someone believed. And perhaps in a not-so-distant future, this story still has a new chapter to be told. If you've made it this far, we want to know how this video touched your heart. Comment below and share how this message spoke to you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving transformative content. Leave a like to support this mission, and of course watch the next video that is already on the final screen. See you there.